My name is Natalia Brizuela, and I'm the director of the Art Research Center for this year. And I am very ecstatic to be introducing Silvia Gruner and Tarek Elhaik today. I'm going to introduce both of them, and then Silvia is going to give us a travelogue through her work. And then Tarek will join her for a conversation, and then we'll open the floor to all of you so you can ask questions, etc. So over the last 3 decades, Silvia Gruner's work has focused on a number of materials and media, among them video, photography, film, and performance. Despite the multiple material incursions, her work has explored some very consistent themes. Since her earliest work, we can find a profound investigation into the relationship between the still image and the moving image. This linked to another fertile trope for her practice, which is the notion that places are, as she states in a long conversation interview with Maria Minera, that is in this beautiful book, of which there's a copy outside for you to look at but return. Is the notion that places are provisional and never definitive or final, as movement and transformation over time occurs. This could also be a way of describing identity for Silvia Gruner's work, which is another looming theme over the course of these last 3 decades of production. Oscillating between being Mexican and not being quite Mexican, her family arrived in Mexico from Eastern Europe in the mid-20th century. She then studied art in Jerusalem and Boston in the late 1970s and 1980s before returning to Mexico. Late 70s. Did I make that up? Did you start?
I started
in
78.
78.
I was in high school.
And I was like, that's what I've always read, so if that's wrong, someone has lied.
I was in high school. I'm not that old.
She is both a Mexican artist and a contemporary artist whose work is rooted in Mexican objects and matter, while also uprooted from it through an extremely conceptual practice. Territory, as site, as place, as earth and ground, is always shifting in her work. And now I'm quoting her, "The flow of things is essential for me," she states in that same interview that I just quoted. And she continues saying, "Unending actions that don't go anywhere, because the journey, the path taken, the action is more important than the event or the result," she states. So the centrality of location and dislocation has led Gruner to work with and through her body in a number of her pieces. The title, actually, of this long conversation that I've now been quoting from twice, with Maria Minera, speaks about this question of the body in her work, and of her body as her body of work, where materiality, embodiment, and authorship are entangled. That title is "My Body of Work is Mine." Tarek Elhaik is an associate professor of anthropology at UC Davis, and many of us here, well, I didn't know him at that time, but whatever, know Tarek well because he got his PhD in anthropology here at UC Berkeley. And besides being an associate professor of anthropology, he also directs at UC Berkeley the Anthropology of the Image Lab, a space for conversations with practitioners, curators, and theorists from multiple disciplines. There is extraordinary podcasts of these dialogues that have taken place over the last 4 years almost, right? That you can access online if you visit the Anthropology of the Image Lab website. The question of curating and conversation between anthropology, art, and philosophy, or what he calls zones of mutual intrusion, is at the heart of, I would say, his entire body of work, including his book, The Incurable Image, Curating Post-Mexican Film and Media Arts. His research is in the more specific fields of, as he describes it, aesthetic anthropology, anthropology of contemporary arts, and anthropology of the contemporary image. And he's currently writing a book that offers an alternative genealogy of aesthetic anthropology by examining the works of contemporary, conceptual artists around the Averroan problem of cogitation. So please join me in welcoming Silvia and Tarek today.
Okay. Well, before I go there, I'll say a couple of things here. Just, I would like to thank the Arts Research Center at UC Berkeley and Natalia Brizuela for inviting me, and also the Anthropology of the Image Lab, UC Davis, and Tarek Elhaik for having this conversation for me. What I'm going to do is, I'm not going to talk about 30 years of my work because it's too much for everyone, not only for me. I'm going to talk about work of the last decade, of the past 10 years. Well, not talk much, I'm going to show you some work that is, in a way, trying to be the context for a work that I am working on now. It's a work in process that I will show you later. So first, it's going to be, ¿cómo se dice? Antecedentes, antecedents of this other work. So I just want to read a tiny, tiny little text that gives the context to the work I've been doing in the last 10 years. So it goes. The psychiatric model is a son of modernity. The idea of social exclusion and inclusion could be translated architecturally as a relation between madness and sanity. Why is that hospitals and mental institutions are recycled into art schools? Why is it that art and recreation are associated with models to cure society? For this project, I would like to document hospitals, sanatoriums, and mental asylums that have become art schools or art spaces. This is an introduction for the work that is in process that I will show you later. The work is called in Spanish, Viva cautivo, sea feliz, live captive, be happy. Basically, and it's a work in process. It's not closed yet. It was photographed. It's a series of photographs I will show you, black and white, and it was photographed in 3 different places. El SEMA, which is the Centro Morelense de las Artes, Cuernavaca, Morelos. El SEMA is an art school in Morelos, in Mexico, that used to be the civil hospital in Cuernavaca. Then CEBA, which is El Centro Estatal de Bellas Artes in Mérida, Yucatán. This is in Mérida, in the south of Mexico. And this place used to be literally an asylum, the mental asylum of the late 19th century. No? And then La Escuela de Artes Plásticas de Puerto Rico. I traveled to Puerto Rico, where the School of Fine Arts basically is it used to be called the Antiguo, the Antiguo, the old, you know.
The historical.
No, not the historical, the old
¿Hospital psiquiátrico?
Sí, asylum. Se llamaba El Antiguo Manicomio. I don't know how you translate that. It's very clear in Spanish.
Yeah.
El Antiguo Manicomio. So it was the mental hospital, and there was also a hospital de Nuestra Señora de la Concepción el Grande, which now houses the design part of the art school. So this is the work in progress I will show you later. So, but I'm going to start with this PowerPoint of antecedents. Yeah. To this other work. Can we get the lights on? So I'm going to show these. Then I'm not going to talk much. Actually, I'm not going to talk, and I'm going to go into Viva cautivo, sea feliz. Okay. Lights off. All of them. Thank you. out of this. After I do Viva Cautivo Sea Feliz, we're open to any question. So I'm gonna escape. I don't know if I can do it. How do I get to where I need to get? Okay, so we go. poco más.
Okay, I'm done.
So we're going to try to have a conversation for about 20 minutes to half an hour, and then we open it to questions. So Silvia and I had done this before in Puebla during her show at the Museo Amparo, and it was a different kind of conversation. It was a different script. This was a completely different script because I had not seen these images before. So to respond to her work in process, I had to, in fact, process the images that I was just...
Process the process.
Process the process, yes. And I think this idea of the process is what I would like to start talking about. So I'm not going to repeat some of the things that I say in the essay of mine in this book. But I want to start with the image of the brain in the courtyard in one of the schools, one of the art schools. And I think Natalia was quite right to introduce my new work as a work that revolves around the question of cogitation, right? So I found myself thinking about the notion of photographic cogitation. I found myself thinking about these images either as, so I have lots of notes here. So is this an essay without voiceover, a little bit like Chris Marker did, for example, in Souvenir d'un Avenir, Remembrance of Things to Come? Or is this a brainstorm, right? And can a brainstorm be curated? So immediately connected to some of the ideas that you and I have talked about in the past, the idea of the incurable. Can the flow of images like this, deliver to us like if it were chemicals on a drip? Can it be curated, right? So I would say that, as in your past work, the question of the incurable continues. Then again, because it is a brainstorm / essay, then you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that the other name that came to mind within the anthropological archive is the name of Gregory Bateson, who makes a distinction between two kinds of inquiries: inquiries as through pattern, or inquiries through substance. So an ontological kind of type of inquiry, looking at the being of, or a search for patterns, right, or patterns of relationships. And then the diagram, in the photographic cogitation that you kind of assaulted us with in a very interesting way, led me to think about this relationship between, form of an essayistic form that seeks patterns, but patterns of abstraction as well, that we see in the three-dimensional architectural form that you document quite beautifully. So this idea of cogitation, I'm not going to get into the debate between Derrida and Foucault about the relation between the madman and can the madman doubt, right? So the madman.
Can you talk about?
So one of the controversies between Derrida and Foucault after the publication of Madness and Civilization and the abridged version, and then the whole debate between both philosophers. Derrida was accusing Foucault of having misread Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy by saying that Foucault was too hasty to accuse Descartes of having foreclosed the possibility of madness within the cogito itself, or the act of thinking itself, or the production of knowledge through the act of thinking. Right? So there is this very beautiful exchange. It's an acrimonious exchange that has been written about. But the sentence that Derrida levels and the critique that he levels at Foucault, which is quite interesting, he says that the madman cannot doubt. Okay. And the madman cannot have an œuvre.
A what?
An œuvre, a work. So, so I think it is neither an essay nor a brainstorm, but you started with a hypothesis, which is the hypothesis
the madman cannot doubt. What was the other one?
And the madman cannot have an œuvre, corpus of work, right? So I am interested in the notion of cogitation, but from a different tradition, and I think Gregory Bateson belongs to that tradition, but also Ibn Rushd, the 12th century Andalusian thinker, and he says cogitation, at the time at least, rereading it from the peripatetic and the Aristotelian tradition, he says something very, very beautiful, which I think can be a point of departure. He said cogitation is actually a wide spectrum of states of mind. Okay? It moves from ijtihad, intellectual struggle, it moves to a state of amorousness, it moves to a state of mourning, of melancholia, of playfulness. So cogitation is not yet, cogitare is not yet reduced to intelligere, or the act of thinking itself. So I would call what you showed us today a photographic cogitation in the Averroist and in the Batesian sense of the term. Okay. So I had seen some earlier parts of Cautivo Serafenis, Viva Cautivo Serafenis. And to me it connected with some of your earlier work in which you reanimate sites of confinement. You reanimated Jean Genet's Champ d'Amour, for example, a very beautiful installation. It's called Champ d'Amour. You also reanimated an ex-convent, La Merced, in Mexico City, which was really the reason why I decided to do fieldwork in Mexico. It was such a beautiful installation, 1995. And now you are reanimating manicomios converted into art school. So the gesture of reanimation, I think, is central to the work. So it's a reanimation through photographic cogitation. That's how I see it. So is this a brainstorm? And can you respond?
What is a brainstorm?
Yeah,
I mean, what are you talking about when you're saying a brainstorm?
So
because it's a term that
yes.
can be so many things.
Yeah. So my question is, the element of surprise here is very interesting to me, because you made it very clear. You started, you gave your hypothesis, in fact, at the table, then you moved, and then it was silence, right? And then we can get back to the question of silence, the relationship between silence and madness. So, and going back to the question of cogitation and doubt and belief, we need to believe in these images. So this is the question. How much faith do you expect us to have in the images that you are showing? It's an open question. I don't have an answer to it. What kind of doubt are we allowed to have in the image flow that you are sharing with us? And at what point do we go beyond this dialectic of belief and doubt, and then we just try to create patterns of sorts?
Can I say?
Yeah, no, that's
I mean, just to respond to that, I mean, for me it's very clear this is a construction. I mean, how much you believe or how much you don't believe, you know, depends on each of you and what you want to see. I mean, it's an essay of sorts, if you want to call it an essay. I mean, I don't see it related to writing. I see related more to cogitation and to movement in space and to finding things. So I would say it's as true as you want it to be true. I mean, if you want to know details of the process, for example, there's nothing in these photographs that I touched. I didn't move an object. I encountered the object. I encountered the spaces. And the spaces were full of people. They were full of art students. And I decided that the photographs were going to be empty. So it's a construction. I mean, what this construction says to any one of us, or what this type of, as you say, brainstorm or whatever, or organization of images. I mean, obviously this is edited. You could see it almost like a book, you know, what I just showed you. I mean, one of the ideas I have, because this is still in process, is to show it as a film. I mean, as still images. I mean, they're beautiful, but I mean, nobody's going to buy them, and I'm not going to print them all. But I think also the tension that Natalia talked about between the still image and the moving image is always here, you know, and it's a tension that I think it's within me. And every time I encounter a photograph, I want things to move because I need to move beyond that image. It's not like, it's as if I need to, yes, I encountered something, but then I need to just go beyond that encounter. So in terms of the process, I mean, these are things that I'm very interested in. You know, I think of the definitions you talked about, I would coincide with you that this has more the last form of cogitation, you know, of different states of mind and different things that cross and go, you know, from the big to the small to the, I mean, there's a lot, there's architecture, but there's architectures, there's structures, you know, like in my piece of hemispheres at home, you know, where I'm just, all these strings are crossing, you know, in different ways. Sometimes in a very Cartesian way, and sometimes in a completely insane way, you know, just kind of like. So it just goes toward those directions. I think what I would like to do with this is to make a film. I don't know if it's going to be silent. Most of my films are silent. And I know they're very demanding, especially in a time where everything is just so filled with noise and images and information. And I think, you know, I want you to bring the information you have and connect to the images. I mean, I think it would be freer, too, if this was a film that was set up as a film installation and people could come and go. I mean, I really like that people come and go. I don't want to have them in chairs but I think there's something interesting in this format. I mean, I don't do conference performances, but I really wanted to show this work in progress. I'm interested either more in performances or in installations, in film installations or video installations. But yeah, there's something a little sadistic about this situation with my point going like this and trying to a little bit see how much seconds I leave each image. I mean, there is something happening, and I'm very aware of where you are and who moves and who's uncomfortable and but I think it's also an act of resistance, and I think this is something we've talked about a lot, and I think the last 15 years in my work have been very radical in that sense. In the sense of resisting not only the art world, the commercial art world, but resisting normality and also time. I mean, time is a very important thing for me. So either something like Un Chant d'Amour, which is basically the one scene of the, I mean, it's a replay of the one scene of the two prisoners in the jail, you know, citing directly that scene from Jean Genet's film and expanding it, you know,
communicating through holes.
Communicating. I mean, it's the two prisoners, you know, communicating with the smoke through the hole, you know. And instead of two people, I have three people. I am one of them, and then two men. So it's a woman and two men. And it's expanded to 59 minutes, you know. So this is what you see. It's a pan here and there of this slowed action of basically loving or desiring through some kind of image of a wall in between, for example. You know? So I think, I mean, in terms of myself as an artist, I think I'm very conscious that I'm doing it. And that I am resisting some kind of normality and productivity and flow in the art world and in whatever, all the rest of the things we know. So I think doing this with Tarek for me was also a way of resisting the usual formats in academia, no? And just having some kind of experience together of something that's truly in process, you know? It's just opening this process so you see. I mean, in terms of credibility, I don't know, you know. I showed this in an art school in Mexico like a few months ago, and of course it was full of very, very, very young people, young and bored people. And everybody just got hooked on the idea of madness, you know, as if I was the expert on madness. It was wild. And it's just interesting where a conversation goes, according to whoever is here.
I think also this is something that we've talked about in the past. I mean, I like to describe your work as a strategy of exhaustion. I think I would say that there's more of a masochism at work, but in a very interesting sense of the term, is that you are literally. I mean, there are several pieces. And I'm thinking, in particular, in the pieces where I think you're testing the nervous system of the spectator and of the artist who is thinking about ways to find
I think I'm doing
correspondences.
that, but I don't think it's masochistic. We have to discuss that.
Yeah, that masochism in the sense of inverting the relationship between master-slave. I think that there is also the question of modernism and modernity, which is quite present, and of course not a critique, but it is certainly something that I would like to hear you talk a little bit about. It is that you are not suggesting that there is an affinity between, let's say, the figure of the artist, the madman, madwoman, the shaman, the neurotic. I'm thinking about Jean Rouge, for example, the Maître Fou, for example. The last sentence of that film is, and how have they, speaking of Westerners in particular, and non-Westerners, how have they found a solace for the ailments of modernity? You are not seeking in some kind of otherness a solace. There is no solace here. So I'm just wondering, the movement between these various locations and sites, Puerto Rico, Cuernavaca, is the geography of these sites given? I mean, you are, in this sense, a groundbreaking figure in the 1990s in Mexico, to having overturned, what was called then some kind of Mexicanist aesthetics, right? In which I think identity or Mexicanist identity was being deterritorialized and dismantled by a generation of really brilliant curators, artists, and the new venues that were mushrooming in Mexico City, and really kind of turning their back to the historical avant-garde, vanguardia of the 1920s and 30s. So these sites are reanimated and depopulated and depeopled, right? I mean, we don't see human beings in these images, but we see three-dimensional forms. We see objects that are ordinary objects that acquire an architectural form. I'm just wondering, what does the movement between these different sites?
I think I want to go back to what you were saying about Jean Rouge, and his film. How does one cure modernity, or how does one deal with modernity? No, with progress, with the Western way, let's say. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, like, I think the toughest and the saddest and the darkest thing I ever read by Lacan, basically, who said that one cannot cure, that one cannot educate, and one cannot save. And I think it's like, for me, it's like a limit of Western experience and thought from a Lacanian point of view. Now, I think the way I'm walking through these spaces has to do with the idea of a dead end, and has to do with the idea of a dead end of maybe those questions. At the same time, there's a moment when I'm in the Puerto Rico area that I go to the archive. I'm not attempting to do an archival work. I went to the archive because I was extremely lucky that the city of Puerto Rico showed me the archives, the architectural archives of the city. I was like, okay, so what drawer do we open for you? And I was just like, what? No, and I was with my camera on top of the huge thing, seeing the architectural archives of the city and how these things really happen physically, architecturally. There's the new drawings, which are all these isometric drawings of the new architecture, of the art school becoming, of the loony place becoming the art school, Again, so and also the only thing I found about the asylum, in terms, there's a lot of architectural documentation, but in terms of photographs, was a tiny, tiny, tiny little book that was printed, I don't know, in the 20s or the 30s or something, and it was a little tiny, como una revista, like in offset, like a magazine in offset, and that's where I take these pictures that look like Valdesares, or like Andy Warhol. So basically, I was just interested in what was there, what was left. There's also, in all the spaces, I think a recurrent image is kind of the leftover. It's as if someone went to eat, and then they left the leftovers. And leftovers of what? What was the meal? Or who was there? Or what time is that? So I think there's, now, it's not like I set up to do these things consciously. I really don't know what I'm doing ever. So I just encounter these things and follow the instincts, I was there for days and I just allowed myself to find things. And of course I showed you almost 300 images, but I have like 1,500. So this is an edition of the 1,500. It's a construction. So
it's like a Frederick Wiseman ratio.
Something like that. Yeah, I just also, I don't know, it has to do with the performative, but it also has to do with what makes you go on. What makes you go on as an artist, what makes you go on as a photographer, keeping on photographing these things. It's like I have to prop myself, when I'm doing this. So in a way I do photograph like a war photographer, in places that have nothing to do with war, and that have nothing to do with, they were full of students, they were full of life, they were full of things happening, people were doing their projects, and they were full of generous people who let me be there. But there's like a strange dynamic that I have with the camera. And I think it also has to do with having done film, and film in Super 8, when I was younger, and just using, the way I use my iPhone. Actually, I'm in love with my iPhone because I use it like a Super 8 camera. I don't use all the tricks to look like Super 8 camera, but I just use it all the time, almost like a diary of what I see or what I encounter. So this is more like how I moved through the three spaces. At the beginning, I thought, of course, I can get these grants. And when you start scratching these places, there's tons of places like that in the world. You go to Bethanien in Berlin, it's the case. You go to, what's the name? It's Governor's Island in front of Manhattan, where they used to have the asylum. Not only the asylum, but also the hospital for
Roosevelt Island.
Roosevelt Island, exactly. Yes, Roosevelt Island, yeah. So, there's all these places for many, many, many different reasons transform themselves into other places. I think a lot of real estate is happening no, in Roosevelt Island, the place that was the sanatorium for varicella, no, for the, what's he said?
Smallpox.
Smallpox is now part of Cornell University. It's going to become part of the campus of Cornell University. And the place that was, which is an amazing place, it's really easy to get there, but the place that used to be the mental asylum is an absolute perfect panopticon. I think it's 8 sites, if not 6. And it's now lofts for very, very rich people. I went into the lobby and I really wanted to photograph. I mean, it was freaky. That was a strange transition. I wanted to photograph, and they didn't let me because they said I would copy the architect and the designer of the place. And I said, no, I'm not going to copy him. And they said, no, it's prohibited. You cannot take photos. This is a design, new lodging for, condominiums. And that's it. So I said, well, okay. But, I'm saying these things because I also didn't know, like, how far did I want to go with this. I mean, I'm not going to spend 8 years doing, art schools that used to be hospitals, that used to be mental, that used to, I mean, I'm not interested. I'm interested in what happened in these few years, I think this might become a film, I don't know. If it will have voiceover, if it will be silent, have music. I have no idea how to construct that. I mean, in terms of images, I think this construction works. Like, it can be different, but it works, And in terms of like how one image goes into the other, well, I don't know if they fade into the other. I mean, I'm going to do something simple and that stands by itself, and people can come and go and look at it and be there as long as they want. And get what they want, and what they don't want, they can leave. I mean.
You once described to me, I remember vividly, this was in your studio in Mexico City, that you approach these images and your work in general as a form of desperate playfulness. That's the term that you use. So that to me evokes another psychoanalytical tradition, which is not Lacanian, but more kind of a Winnicott emphasis on potential spaces, but holding environments. And I'm just wondering if this playfulness is specific to your photographic work, or is this something that you see moving across?
No, I see
your
it moving
installation?
across everything, yeah. And I think it's desperate, and I think it's playful. And I think I have to do it that way, if not I wouldn't make art. Yeah. Because I have to have pleasure and fun and some kind of like go beyond limits, in my work. I really have to. If not, I don't know, I will become a cook. I'm a good cook. Why not be a cook? But there's something that I don't know when I set up to do something. And if I would know it, I wouldn't do it. It would bore me very fast.
So this mode of creation is recent, or this is something that you've been doing?
I think since
the Super 8 work?
Yes. I mean, look at Arena, for God's sakes. I mean, it's just like.
Do you want to describe Arena quickly? Since you mentioned it, okay. So Arena is a piece in which Silvia is
rolling
down a hill in a dune near the sea, and she does the action repetitively.
It was my first Super 8 film, and basically it was the first film I constructed, so I filmed in color, in black and white, in slow motion, I mean, I was doing this exercise of really rolling, throwing myself down the dune. It was very cold, it was the winter, it was in Cape Cod, and I had a friend film me, and it was my first exercise in film. So also the end product, the end film, is an exercise on repetition, but also an exercise on possibility. And it just goes on until I stop, and then it finishes. And it's short, it's maybe 5 minutes long, it's silent, and it goes between. I'm also doing some kind of performance, putting some red oxide on my body, painting my body, and then going down the hill. I don't know if I was thinking I was going to color that hill, because I never colored the hill. I mean, it wasn't but it was some kind of ritualistic thing that I was doing before I would jump every time.
So I'm going to ask one more question, then we can open it. So you're not doing a history of these mental institutions, nor are you doing a history of these art schools, but you are historicizing the relationship between art and madness. So that's why there are no details. I mean, there are objects. You have locations, you have courtyards, you have recognizable architectural forms. You have some elements that give you a sense of some kind of geography, right? But ultimately, that's not what you're interested in.
I think I'm interested in what you said, in pattern and substance. I'm really interested in those things. I think it's a work that's more phenomenological. I don't know how you say that in English. Phenomenological.
Okay. So, all right. So, okay. So this is where I see two things. Again, I see this, right? These are patterns, right? These are drawn, right? I mean, they are handmade. Or you find patterns in architectural forms, in tiles, in stools that are imbricated to one another, right? So there are many ways of generating abstraction, either found abstraction or generated through, let's say, through the hand. Where I don't agree with you that this is just phenomenological.
No, I didn't say just.
Yeah,
I
so
said I think it's phenomenological. Or I'm closer to that.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just. I'm saying I feel closer to the definition you talked about, or the moment you described pattern and substance, and this way of approaching reality in some kind of empirical way, which is just empirical in the sense of doing it.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that the mode of observation that one sees, not only in your work that precedes this particular work, clearly has an empirical dimension to it. What I'm interested in is the observation of that link between madness and art. That's what you are observing, and then you are translating that link, or that research, or that inquiry into that link, which is a historical link, which is a modernist link also, and a romantic one also, in a certain way.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is like putting.
And then it becomes abstract. That's what
yeah,
I
but
find
I'm
really.
putting a light on it. I'm saying this relationship exists. I'm asking these questions, and I'm putting a light on these
Yeah,
questions.
absolutely, I agree with you.
I don't know if I could go into a discussion like Derrida and Foucault, I don't know if a madman cannot doubt. I don't think so. I think any person can doubt, probably being crazy or not, And the madman cannot have a corpus of work. There's a lot of people who are schizophrenics and who are like medically diagnosed, who are amazing artists, or who have been amazing artists. So I don't know.
But you're not doing art brut, right? I mean, that's not what you are.
I don't think so.
But that's precisely what I think is interesting in this project, is that you are historicizing this link. I mean, there's really, Louis Sass wrote an incredible book on modernism and madness, right? So this link is modernist, and I think the contemporary problem that you are putting a light on is, are we still in that problem space or not? I mean, that's how I would put it. And now maybe we can perhaps
open this because I don't know how to answer.
No, yeah, I'm just saying that from my perspective, that's how I see it.
Okay, I perceived it absolutely as an endurance piece. I thought it was kind of a performance. I never attended a talk in which somebody was not talking at all. And as you said, I also perceived the sadistic side of it. And I could hear the stomach of people. I could hear the boredom and the anxiety and so on. But you also said that you are thinking of maybe doing it as a film and editing. You would lose all that side by doing this. It would come like the outcome would be completely different.
I'm not sure. I want to try it.
But because if you do it as a, for instance, also the title and the fact that we had to be stuck here in the chair. Mm-hmm. We couldn't go. It was a relation also to the idea, of people with mental disability being forced to stay in those asylums, and ask. I don't know. Maybe I overread the entire thing, but I felt it this way.
I presented this 3 times.
Okay, I have a second.
No, I presented this 3 times.
Okay.
Once, 2 times in an art school, like 1 time in an art school to the students in Merida, then another time in Soma to the, to the conceptual students, the board, the board students who are like too incredible and too conceptual to be interested in anything. And this is the 3rd time, And I think, I don't know if anyone is an artist here besides me, Maria Elena. Yes, you are. A sculptor. Yes?
Yes, a painter, but I have a question.
Yes.
You curated this out of your 1,500 slides.
Yes.
But would you curate a part of it in another context, say photographs of the garden with the strings, which also illustrates part of your point? But would you change the way you curate parts of it, or this is your framework that you want to either make a film of or present like this?
No, wait. The garden and the strings, those were pictures of pieces that I already have done.
Okay. But you're bringing them into this?
No.
No, into this new essay? No?
No, the only thing that is in process is Viva Cautivo, Sea Feliz, which is a black and white photographs that I showed. All the other stuff is work that is already done.
Okay. So that wasn't part of the brainstorm, as it was?
Well, I don't know what the brainstorm is
The
yet.
whole event?
Well, but in a way you were showing there, from what I understood in the first part, like a curated personal archaeology.
Exactly.
As to what this is also a process, an investigation into archaeology.
Exactly.
In terms of the layering of time. Because there's a kind of shift at one moment towards the end, but the vast majority of the images we see in Viva Cautivo, Sea Feliz are ruinous images, right? And so one senses this question of layering, transformation, passage of time, accumulation. And so I found it very interesting that which in itself just is like seeped and speaks archaeological time, however each spectator might want to read into it in terms of patterns or in terms of substance or in terms of history even, you decided to today give us your own archaeology of that archaeology.
Exactly.
That kind of answers your question, but I was curious as to your decision to give us a curated version of a possible archaeology.
My decision to do that has to do with the fact that my work is really vast. And first, I think I'm tired of talking about my work retrospectively. This book is the result of 3 years of work to make a huge exhibition.
Two exhibitions.
2 exhibitions and a book. And by the end of that, I was exhausted with my own history. I was like, please, And I got away in both exhibitions with, in space, in the physical space of the exhibitions, not to have this work set chronologically, or thematically. And I had a lot of problems to try to fight these things, because I think, in general, curators, art historians, but also human beings, try to make relations all the time between things, and they want to put things in categories. And I had a really hard time doing that, and I think it was very successful. Tarek could tell you how the show looked in Mexico. It was like 6 immense spaces in the museum, and it was like almost 30 works of 30 years of my work. So in a way, I did want to do some kind of presentation that would prepare you for this work, and would prepare me for this work, to be able to show you this work, because it's a work in progress. There's 8 photographs that have been printed because I got a grant by a foundation, and I had to give them some work, and that's it. But it's a work that I'm trying to understand how to place it. Not in the art world, not in the gallery, not in the museum. How to place it. I think it can become many different things. One of the things that Tarek tells me to do all the time, and I sometimes don't do, is to write, because I have thoughts when I see these things, and things go through my mind as well. I just usually choose to forget them. And then
Yeah, I think it's also almost it's as if you're searching. Curation, I think, is the right term here. It's not just self-curation, although there is that archaeology that Natalia is talking about. But it's almost a justified reaction to the toxicity of the art world and all of the problems that we know with it. But also to think about non-exhibitionary forms of curation, perhaps. In other words, writing could be also understood as a form of curation of sorts. But here maybe you're not interested to...
It's just I'm not into conferences. I'm not into conferences. I'd rather do an installation or rather do something in space. That's what I do, And I love film, and I love constructing film. And I like giving talks like this, especially when we can talk about things that are really important to the work, like we've been doing now. But I'm not, Andrea Fraser. I really don't like that form. I really hate it. It's didactical. I think it's presumptuous, and I think it's a product of the art world. I don't think it's art. I think it's art, but art very linked to the art world and to the dynamics of power of the art world. My work is really not interested in that. So to put that layer on this discourse, or whatever you want to call it, or the essay, or the blah, 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 no. For me, it would be like a false thing. I think the images are tough. So this sense of, it's not like I want to be sadistic with you. I want to really show you the images silently, because that's how they exist now. And I do think the images are tough. All of them are kind of like close but distant. I don't know how to explain how it happens, but all the images have that in common. And I don't know. I can't explain how my eye sees or how I construct this thing. But I did know when I edited, you know, from like the 1500 things to the 260 or 300 images, that I wanted that quality, that I wanted that tone. If this was music, this is like a musical tone. So I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I know I'm not going to do conferences with it. I mean, that I know for sure. You know, it's just it's not interesting for me. I mean, it's interesting for me to have a conversation. It's fantastic. But I mean, yes.
As I was watching the images, I was trying to think about how I might have been relating to them if it hadn't been framed as these mental institutions turned into art schools. And what that did was it didn't historicize it in the way that you're talking, it psychologized it. And so watching these images and looking at them and trying to think about, you know, or responding to them in psychological terms, you know, what had gone on here, and, you know, was this a place where people were damaged, were they cured, you know, what is the relationship between that and art students, are they being damaged or are they being cured? And so in a way it became very difficult to encounter these images, you know, on their own terms, you know. And so so you were talking about the phenomenological and so on, and so I'm just trying to think about, I mean, could these images be reframed in very different ways that would bring forth other kinds of relations to them, or maybe they're not framed in those ways. And again, this idea of, I mean, the romantic history of madness and creativity and so on is, you know, so permeated my experience of watching these because of the framing of them. So I'm just, I guess, why is it important actually to frame this in those terms? I mean, it may be something motivating for you as a way of moving into these spaces, but I'm wondering if it's necessary as they move into the world.
I don't know. I know, you know, that's why I asked the 3 questions, or the 2 questions when I began, you know, was a point of departure, and it's an investigation. I mean, it's a visual investigation. I don't know what to say, you know, how, I mean, the only thing I know is if you play with these images, because I've been looking at them for a long time, I mean, 3 years. I don't look at them daily, thank God. And also, you know, thank God I know. I mean, these images are nothing. They're invested of how we are contextualizing. Going back to what you're saying, I mean, a piece of chalk in a wooden thing is a piece of chalk in a wooden thing. I mean, I know it's a little Wittgenstein what I'm saying, but it is, you know. There's even one thing with shadows that I adore, that photograph that looks like the duck and the thing, you know. And it's none of that. I mean, it's shadows, it's the light, it's Puerto Rico. It's really hard to photograph there. I mean, it's what it is. So I think in all of my work, this is something there. I don't know if in all of it, but there's something elusive about my work. You know, there's something where it's flexible. I play with it. If you take these photographs and print them beautifully, like I've done, 8 of them, and you put them in a different order, I mean, you get a completely different reading. of anything. So I think it's going back to the people I love a lot, you know, in the history of film, and the people who, you know, there's one specific person I wish I had met, but he died before I was able to, and that is Hollis Frampton. And I adore his work, and I just love the way, I love his freedom to do things, and just like to what?
And also to burn things as they are created.
Yes, I mean, I think, yeah, not only in that film, but in all the experiments and the things he was doing. Or, for example, I was thinking of all the portraits he did, you know, of New York, of his friends, you know, all the painters. The black and white portraits, they're amazing, you know, and they're all like, they were all his friends, and they would all say, okay, yes, I'll see it for you. I mean, it wasn't a big deal. But they're amazing, they're beautiful, they're playful, I don't know, you know, I think I'm not interested in structuralist film or photography because of systems, you know, I'm really not, I mean, but there's something about possibilities, and there's something about transitions, and there's something about going from the still image to the moving image, like animating, like Tarek was saying, like creating a little change, like moving things, like going from here to here, you know, that really fascinates me. Because in the right frame of mind, doing this is incredible. And in the wrong frame of mind, doing this is very incredible. And I think this is what's interesting.
This is why I bring up this, you know, this sort of psychologized lay over this, in a sense that sort of cogitating on this relationship between madness and creativity, in a sense, at least for me, remove me from the very things that you're describing about that seems most fascinating about your work. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, one of the things about structural film and so on was precisely the attempt to de-psychologize, you know, and so for me these were two contradictory elements in this piece, and maybe that's interesting, but I'm curious about that, and more so as you describe what you were doing.
But I wonder also if that's also, that hinging it into or giving it a very specific frame is also the nature of this particular event. Who knows how it will be in another iteration. Because I kept thinking that I think I forgot that quickly, even though it was somewhere there, but because the way I'm familiar with your work is in this insistence on leaving things unhinged so that they can precisely move, you know, and so things can move into relationship with each other and change relationships. And in part because I've also been hinged because of discipline into being a Latin Americanist, right? Which is something that for many of the people here who might know me or have been my students know that it's like I'm constantly trying to unhinge things. And that's one of the reasons why I find your work so interesting is because you emerge at this moment, which Tarek referred or made a reference to in contemporary art in Mexico, which was its own unhinging in relationship to Mexican modernism and that kind of early part of the mid-20th century. At the same time, that very scene in Mexico that was unhinging itself in the past most of it became hinged to this art world. And you chose to remain unhinged.
I am the unhinged of the unhinged.
Yes.
People didn't like it.
No. But
And they
I have
still
always
don't like
highly
it.
respected you for having made that choice, you know, at a moment when then Mexican art became this other thing. It perhaps got unhinged from, you know, one thing, and it became hinged into the art world and what the art world expected of Mexican art.
Well, you know, the people very directly said that I became subjective, or that I became, it's true.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I couldn't illustrate their discourses anymore. I'm sorry, I couldn't. I mean, I didn't ever try to illustrate their discourse, but the moment, you know, my work, I started doing things like, you know, the Away From You work, which is these 9 crazy, intense, huge installations where I'm just swimming, you know, up the walls and, you know, round the clock and back and forth. And, I mean, whatever. I mean, first people said that they were moving murals, and I was like, what? You know, Cuauhtémoc Medina, really, he wrote that in a newspaper, and I said, Cuauhtémoc, what's gone into you? I mean, what's moving murals? I mean, they're videos. I mean, what's this? I mean, and I think, yeah, I think I really chose to unhinge myself. It's not like I am not part of that scene, but I don't want to represent, because I don't know what to represent. Not even with myself. I mean, if not, I would be Andrea Fraser. I mean, I just don't know what to represent. I mean, I'm an artist. I do what I do. I don't.
And this is also, I think, I mean, this is something that has been recurrent in the history of visual arts in Mexico. I mean, if you think about the Ruptura movement in the 1960s, right? I mean, they were accused of being anti-patriotic because they were not precisely representing, I'm thinking about Matias Goeritz and other artists of that period. So I think what's incredibly fascinating in the 1990s in Mexico City, and certainly Silvia is a prominent figure of that moment, is, you know, I mean, when Roger Bartra was talking about the post-Mexican condition, he was not saying that these are not Mexican artists. He was saying that enough of this Mexicanist aesthetics and this attempt to represent or forjar una patria, or you know, forge a nation. So we didn't want to talk about this today. Right? So it seems that this is why I. But I think it came,
it's like, I mean, there's.
So I think this work, in this sense, radicalizes some of the things we've done in the 90s.
I think so.
That's how I see it.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think in the 90s, yeah, I was taking some distance from the Mexican context, you know, and at the same time using Mexican symbols, or exactly, I mean, the way many other people have done, you know, the way Avaroa is doing now. I mean, it's not like I mean, things like that. It's just that, and this is, well, another conversation. No, that has to do with Geritz and the contemporaneous and stuff, you know. Geritz and this group knew very well how to capitalize on the non-Mexicans. There's the capitalization of Mexicans, and then there's the capitalization of non-Mexicans. And we can go from Matias Geritz to Gabriel Orozco. So I think I'm just not interested in capitalizing. I'm interested in doing my work, you know. And I guess I'm playing, and I guess, you know, it would be nice to be able to live off my work. But I mean, apparently there's other ways I can manage. But it's not like I am an obscure figure or whatever. But it's true that that most of my work is known outside of Mexico, you know, because, or I do things like this, and people suddenly see one piece, or people come to my studio, but I'm not part of the scene. I'm not, you know, I'm a historical figure. I'm not part of the scene.
It is 7:30, and even though we don't like following time, part of my duty to follow time sometimes. So Maybe there's time for one more question if someone has a question that you want to ask, or we'll thank Silvia and her.
Yeah.